So just for the record, yeah, please state your name and affiliation.
Jeff House of Space News. We heard a lot of discussion in the panel session about cooperation in lunar exploration. We want to start off with Administrator Bridenstine and whoever other agency heads would like to talk. How does those words get turned into specific agreements to cooperate either on the Lunar Gateway or in other efforts of lunar exploration, including the Moon Village concept?
So there's a process that we're going through right now, and it's ongoing. We're formulating what the architecture will look like, and then we're looking at each of the space agencies and their capabilities, and then we're going to be incorporating those capabilities into the architecture. Now, what's different about the Gateway, when you compare it to the International Space Station, is that it's a lot smaller. It's a fraction of the size of the International Space Station. So that means having additional partners on the specific Gateway is maybe more difficult than having partners on the International Space Station. However, because it's open architecture, we're going to have the ability to have partners involved in ways that maybe they couldn't have been involved on the International Space Station. And just for point of reference, on the International Space Station, we've had 103 different countries participate in experiments on the International Space Station, which has been a tremendous success. And of course, that includes not just countries, but also academia and companies. And so that's an amazing success. And we want to have all of that success also on the Gateway, and to include going to the surface of the Moon, activities on the surface of the Moon, activities between Earth orbit and lunar orbit, and activities on the Gateway. So we're looking for inclusion in the entire architecture, not just on one node, if that makes sense.
David Todd, Surrogate Space Intelligence and Spaceflight Magazine. I've got two questions, one to Mr. Sivan and one to Mr. Bridenstine. Basically, the first question is to do with time limits. Have you been set a time limit by President Trump into landing on the Moon, say before his end of his term, or second term? And the second question is, does India, with its manned space program, have any plans to go to the Moon itself?
So I don't have a specific time limit that I've been given. The instruction I've been given is to do this sustainably, so that we can not just go to the Moon once, but go to the Moon again and again and again over a long period of time with international partners and commercial partners. The other thing that's important is this time we want to utilize the resources of the Moon. So we can get there fast, and we can get there fast as fast as we can possibly get there. We've done it before, and we can do it again. But we're doing it, this is entirely different. This is not Apollo. We're not recreating Apollo. We're not trying to prove, a technological capability. What we're doing today is establishing an international and commercial cooperative opportunity to go to the Moon sustainably, which is very different than the history that Apollo was.
Regarding the Indian space program, the manned mission, right now the approval is mainly for demonstrating the capability to go to space and come back safely. And right now we don't have any plan to go to Moon. Maybe after this demonstration is over, probably maybe we may think, but right now there's no such plan to go to Moon.
Hi, my name is Anne Barr from a French newspaper, Les Echos. There was one question on, your boat, which was what do you expect Lunar Gateway can find and do that ISS didn't find? So, could you answer this question, please?
Absolutely. So the International Space Station is in low Earth orbit, and it is doing all kinds of experiments in microgravity that we cannot do on Earth. And the technologies, the capabilities that have come from it are enormous, absolutely enormous. In fact, we couldn't be doing what we want to do on the Moon without the International Space Station and our cooperation from our international partners. That being said, what we're doing now is we're going to the Moon, which is entirely different. We're going into deep space. And when you're in low Earth orbit, you have protection from the Van Allen radiation belts so that charged particles coming from the sun the radiation, if you will, is not as damaging to the astronauts. When we go into deep space, there's a whole nother level of capability and technology that needs to be not only developed but understood. And so when we think about the gateway in orbit around the moon, the idea is it is a command module that can be there for 15 years. And on that command module, we're going to be able to not only go back and forth to the surface of the moon, but we're going to be able to do deep space experiments, scientific experiments, including astrophysics, which of course we can do on the International Space Station as well. But when you're in orbit around the moon, there are new opportunities that we don't get in low Earth orbit. We have on the far side of the moon a very quiet atmosphere from an electromagnetic perspective. We can, in some cases, use very low frequency energy coming from deep space to see, distant parts of the universe. So there's a lot of astrophysics that we're going to be able to do on the Gateway. There's a lot of lunar science that we can do on the Gateway, and we can go back and forth to the surface of the moon on the Gateway. And the Gateway is not only going to be in what we call a near rectilinear halo orbit, which means it can be there for a long period of time with very little propulsion, but because it does have solar electric propulsion, which is a technology that the United States is advancing through NASA, we're going to be able to go to the far, to the L1 point on the other side of the moon and the L2 point. So that gives us a lot of opportunity to go to different parts of the moon that we've never been to before and do science and exploration. To be honest, we don't know what we're going to find. Until 2008, we didn't know that there was hundreds of billions of tons of water ice on the surface of the moon. We do know that there are rare earth metals on Earth, and we know that those metals are not Earth metals at all, but they're asteroid impacts from billions of years ago. Well, what's interesting about the moon is it has no active geology and it has no hydrosphere the way the Earth has, which means those materials could be sitting there in vast quantities in different parts of the moon. We know that when asteroids hit the Earth, they also hit the moon. The question is, what can we find from those discoveries? And again, the idea behind the Gateway is to give opportunities for not only other nations, but private companies and others to develop capabilities to make those discoveries. So it could be precious metals. It could be taking advantage of the water ice on the surface of the moon. These are all new capabilities that we need to use the Gateway to achieve.
Maybe I can add something. When I started the discussion for ESA some 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I looked into what is the ISS providing, what are we using at the ISS. And then the question was, if the ISS at a certain point in time will not longer exist, how to then go on. And there's, besides what Jim is saying, what about the moon, this is another part, I will add to that, of course. But the first thing was, okay, the ISS is providing two things right now. It is providing an international platform, and it's providing microgravity research, to make it very simple. It's more now also Earth observation and alpha magnetic spectrometer and so on. But basically, it has these two features, and these two features are very important. And that was the first idea of saying, okay, we need in the future still low Earth orbit experiments. We need to have this, whoever is doing it, whether it's a public or whether it's private. We don't need maybe a big ISS for that purpose, but we need something in low Earth orbit for microgravity research, because it becomes more and more important also for industry. And we should look into international exploration. And there, not just only to think something very far in the future, but the moon. The moon is close, and as Jim correctly said, the moon is interesting for moon science. It's interesting for the water thing, to see what can we do on a celestial body, to use the material over there also for further travels to Mars or whatever. So this is another point. The observatory on the far side is a thing. The water is a thing. There's a lot of things we would like to do on the moon, but also it's a stepping stone to go further. And the Lunar Gateway for me is something like a bus stop towards the moon. So we are using it, we can use it, and then this opens up so also for international participation on the surface of the moon.
and Jan has been working on these activities for a long period of time, encouraging folks to make sure that the moon is not left out of the architecture. But it is also important to note that, as you mentioned, the gateway is a way to get to the surface of the moon, but it also represents eventually, not the first gateway, but the second gateway, a deep space transport. If we want to get to more parts of the solar system with humans, the way to do that is from an orbit of the moon. That near rectilinear halo orbit gives us the best opportunity to get to more parts of the solar system with humans than ever before, which is very different from launching off of the Earth or launching off the moon, for that matter.
So, again, another question.
Yes, Bill Jones from Executive Intelligence Review. There's been a lot of talk now in the last few days about the asteroid protection against asteroids with some of the more fanciful films that have been coming out lately. The Chinese have made a statement last week, Chinese scientists calling for cooperation on asteroid protection. And I know Russia has a program for many years in dealing with this. I wonder, would that be an issue which would be very important in terms of the cooperation, especially as you were talking about with your Chinese colleague, cooperation between China and the U.S. programs in terms of asteroid protection?
Absolutely. So this is something that NASA already does. We've been cataloging asteroids that are in orbit around the sun that could have a crossing path with Earth. And we have been making a catalog based on different sizes of asteroids and what their impact might be to the Earth, and we make that public. So NASA is already doing this, and we've had a lot of success finding asteroids that would be of the right size, but we found absolutely none that put us in jeopardy at this point.
But you have also the mission DART, which is looking to hit an asteroid, or better to say the moon of an asteroid, Didimoon of Didymos. And we intended in the first trip to fly there in parallel to see this billiard game of the Americans. But then we did not get the money on the first round, but we are now looking for a proposal to do this. The thing is, people are saying, okay, you know what it is. If you put a mass, you send a mass on another body, you know what happens. You know it with billiard, but in billiard you have the clear thing that the gravity, the center of gravity is in the middle of the ball, right? In an asteroid, it's not clear, and therefore to really observe what is happening when DART is hitting this moon of the asteroid Didymos, it's very important. So this is already an international cooperation. The only thing is we are missing some money from the European side, but we are fighting for that, and then we will do it together with the Americans.
Yes, I think JAXA is, as I said, engaged in asteroid missions like Hayabusa 2, and this mission can also contribute to issues related to hazardous asteroids, because if you want to solve a problem related to hazardous asteroids, you have to calculate the trajectories precisely, and in order to do that, you have to understand the surface material of the asteroid, or of course inside of the asteroid. So I think anyway, asteroid missions can contribute to solve that problem.
And I think it's important that we all congratulate JAXA on that amazing accomplishment in Hayabusa.
Very much.
Alexander Stern with the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung. That is a question for Administrator Bridenstine and maybe for Jan Wernick, who wants to jump in. There has been a lot of discussions lately, especially within European industry, that SpaceX is charging NASA much more for the same launches that they are doing on the commercial market. Is NASA by this kind subsidizing SpaceX? Is this kind of an unfair competition?
Is NASA subsidizing SpaceX?
Yeah.
By paying more for the launch. Here's the thing. SpaceX, if you look at commercial resupply and now commercial crew, this was a public-private partnership from the beginning, where NASA was putting forth hundreds of millions of dollars, and they were putting forth their own hundreds of millions of dollars to ultimately reach milestones. And each milestone there was a payment from NASA and an investment from SpaceX, to the point where we got now a commercial launch provider carrying cargo back and forth, to and from the International Space Station. And now we're doing that with the next step for commercial crew going back and forth to the International Space Station. So we have blazed this trail, and yes, we have contracts with SpaceX. It is our anticipation that as we go forward, when NASA becomes one of many customers, which is the goal, we want to be one of many customers, and it is also true that we want multiple providers. So those providers are not only going to compete on cost, but they're going to compete on innovation. And whoever can bring down the cost and give us more access ultimately will win future contracts. And we have that. We have multiple providers competing on cost and innovation, and NASA is one of many customers. So I would anticipate in the future you will see the price coming down, and that's good for access to space for all of humanity. I would not characterize that as a subsidy per se. I would characterize that as ultimately establishing a capability that we didn't have before.
Hello, Robin Allen, Swedish Radio. I wonder if you are worried about an increased militarization of space and how you see your role there as space agencies, if there's anything you can do to prevent conflicts in space.
So for ESA, it's very simple. In our convention, we have exclusively peaceful purposes. This is written, and we follow that. Now, this is a simple answer. Of course, you can have a different answer if you say you can use Earth observation, navigation, telecommunication for different purposes. But this is the same as if I buy a knife or a bottle. You can do different things with a bottle. So, but ESA itself, we are strictly for peaceful purposes. And I hope that the things are going on as they are now. That means we don't have the conflict in space, even we have sometimes conflicts on Earth. We are really above all of these problems, and this is good. So we can even bridge earthly crisis. As you can see, the cooperation for the International Space Station launched by Russian launchers being then in the International Space Station without any visa between the Japanese, the American, the Russian and the European part, and using also the Canada arm without a special ITA regulation or whatever.
So actually, I think this question is an important one, but perhaps we can have contributions from all members, and then we'll come on to the Space Force, which is something that Trump's proposing. So if you would like to comment on this too.
I'd just like to reiterate what Jan just said. We also stand for peaceful space, and we have a discussion at the UN platform, quite a number of working groups there, so cannot add anything to that.
Well, for example, JAXA is engaged in SSA, space situation awareness, by observing space debris, and that is to avoid collision between space objects. And I think so space can be, or we engaged in space activities in order to avoid conflicts in space.
Would you like to comment on this in terms of sort of peaceful space?
Definitely that space has to be used for peaceful purposes, because we have a lot of problems to solve for peaceful purposes. We want to admit that. There are also that many problems we have common problem for peaceful purpose. That should be the priority, that should be done, and I think if the direction should be going toward that direction.
So I think the Space Force that's been proposed is an interesting topic.
It is, and I will say this, just like ESA, NASA is not part of the Department of Defense. We are specifically for the peaceful uses of outer space. We love to have partnerships with countries that are not traditional countries that we would partner with, and because we are not part of national security or defense, because we are explicitly separate and explicitly for peaceful purposes, for science and discovery and for exploration, we are able to maintain those relationships and those partnerships that sometimes are more difficult. As it relates to the Space Force, it is absolutely true that space has transformed the human condition on Earth. The way we communicate, some people might listen to this on XM radio, others might watch it on DirecTV or Dish Network or whatever the platforms are here in Europe that you have to deliver television from space. Some people might be receiving this on the internet, in fact, from space. Internet from space is a growing market that we see. The way we navigate, of course, with the GPS signal has transformed the human condition and improved the productivity of all of our countries. So the way we produce food in the United States and around the world, and the way we are using NASA technology and capability ultimately to increase crop yields to feed more of the world than ever before, I think is an important way that we have improved the human condition by way of space. The way we produce energy, the way we do disaster relief, and when you think about capabilities to include using the GPS signal for a whole host of different purposes, including power grid, the distribution or the timing of power on the power grid, the timing of data on terrestrial wireless networks. I'm talking about cell towers. When we think about interbank transfers, all of these things are dependent on space. And we all know it. And we're all very proud of what we have done to improve the human condition because of space. And everybody on this panel, all of our nations, have been involved in ultimately realizing this, not just for the United States, but for all of our countries. And that's a very good thing we should all be proud of. That being said, there are certainly activities in space that are concerning. And anything that is done in space that creates debris is a big problem for everybody. And a number of things have been done in space that have resulted in tens of thousands of pieces of orbital debris that the United States is responsible for tracking and providing that data to the world for free. And we will continue to do that because it's important for all of us to do. But activities that are nefarious in space and the proliferation of technologies that can ultimately diminish the productivity of space, we think is a challenge. Now, I used to be in the House of Representatives in the United States. The Space Force came up for a vote on my subcommittee, and I voted for it in a strong bipartisan way because of the intelligence that we were receiving. I voted for it on the full Armed Services Committee, and it passed the floor of the House of Representatives with 344 votes, which in today's era, it's very difficult to get that much bipartisan support on anything in the U.S. House of Representatives. But we were able to because of the intelligence that people have seen. So space is for peaceful purposes, and it needs to be that way. When NASA was created, it was intentionally set aside for peaceful purposes. But it's also important for us to recognize that when nefarious activities are on the horizon, and in fact even exist today, we have to make sure that those nefarious activities result in no diminishment of space-based capability to improve the human condition on Earth. And I think the President is strongly committed to that.
I've got time for two further questions. I think about one there.
Thank you very much. Two questions. The first one is for NASA Administrator Breitenstein. So my name is Gurubir Singh. I'm a writer based in the UK. I was really grateful to hear your comments about the cooperation that's taking place between NASA and China. I understand there's been some legislation in place in the US that prevents technical collaborative activities between China and the US. Is that still the case, and do you see if it still has some shelf life?
When it comes to space exploration, the answer to that is yes. And that particular provision is an appropriation. What that means is that it expires every year, but it is also renewed every year in the United States Congress, which means that if there comes a day when we can cooperate, that provision would simply expire and we would be able to cooperate.
Do you see a timeline in your watch? Do you think it will happen?
Again, that would be over to the United States Congress based on the information that they're seeing and the intelligence that they receive.
Thank you. The second question is for ISRO Chairman, Mr. Sivan. It's great to hear that India is going forward with the human spaceflight program. It's going to be a completely Indian project, but I understand that because it's quite new, you're working to a very tight timeline, you will be getting some support for space medicine and human spaceflight training, astronaut training. I understand you probably approaching France, ESA, Russia certainly. What about approaching China for that kind of training? Is that on the cards?
Definitely, that is most of the technologies related to this engineering part that already we already demonstrated. Only thing is, as we said very clearly, that is because of that tight schedule given by the government. Right now, that some of the activity, especially that astronaut training and all, that we have one level of training, but that rigorous training we may have to depend on that abroad. And when you talk about abroad, that definitely right now we are not decided which nation are these ones, and definitely that we will take the total end-to-end that assessment and we will decide.
So does that mean you will be approaching China as well?
Yeah, definitely, that is, yes, that also, that is there, but we'll consider that also. This one.
Thank you.
So more questions from the audience? Yes. Any other questions from the audience? On that basis alone. Yes, what happened here, please? Waiting for a bit more mics.
David Todd, Surrey Space Intelligence and Space Magazine. I was speaking with Mr. Loskutov, about Russia's plans for a heavy lift launch vehicle. How far is that progressing? And also, Mr. Briegelstein, would you think that SpaceX might usurp your whole plan in terms of if they actually get the new BFR working correctly?
Let's go ahead of this. I think the plans are, the framework is to have it by 2028, just like the Chinese. So these are the plans.
So a couple of things. So the United States of America, specifically NASA, and in fact the Air Force, and we have contracted with SpaceX for a whole host of capabilities. And that is an amazingly powerful partnership for NASA to have, again, because we become one customer of many customers, and there are numerous providers competing on cost and innovation. So all of that, in my view, is very positive. We want SpaceX to be successful. The more success they have, the more success we have. In other words, we can change our model. Right now, in some areas, we purchase, own, and operate rockets. We purchase, own, and operate crew capsules. And that's the direction we're heading right now, and that will go on for many, many years into the future. Now, if SpaceX or another company, there are others, Blue Origin, for example, comes forward and says, look, we can launch heavy lift to the moon, we can take humans to the moon, we can do these kind of activities, then NASA becomes one customer of many customers. And that, again, drops our costs and increases our access, and then we can take our capabilities, our resources from the American taxpayer, and we can go further.
But that would kill SMS.
No, not at all. We need both. It just enables us to do more, is what it does. It wouldn't kill it at all. It just would enable us to do more than we've ever done before. And that's a wonderful thing.
Thank you. Irene Faltz with Aviation Week. For ESA and JAXA and Roscosmos, can you characterize the discussion currently about extending funding for ISS beyond current international partnership arrangements, and when would you need to make any funding proposals to your respective governments? Thank you.
So for ESA, it's very trivial. We have at the end of next year a council meeting at ministerial level, as it is called. So all the ministers come together, and the ministers then get that's a special procedure. So the Director General has to present a proposal, and then there is a so-called document 100, which has many lines, different proposals of the Director General, a price tag. And then the different member states can say how much they would like to pay for that, and by geo-return they get also back in their country. And that means at the ministerial meeting next year, the Ministerial Council, I will propose also to go on with ISS as well as Lunar Gateway and all of this. So we have E3P. This is a program, an envelope program for exploration, European Exploration Envelope Program, E3P. This covers all of this, covers low Earth orbit, Moon and Mars, also robotic missions, and so therefore we have to do that. We are right now preparing what we call strategic guidelines. This is step number 1, and this one will be shown to the ministers on the 25th of October, and based on that we will develop then the proposal, and that's then the responsibility of the Director General, but I believe that we will go on. It's always a discussion because the member states then want to see an astronaut of this and that nationality and blah blah blah, but this is my task, and I'm sure we will succeed.
Well, JAXA is requesting budgets annually, so I think in that sense JAXA is quite, flexible in that sense. But I think that I would like to make the most of the present ISS. What I mean is that we have to maximize the output of the ISS. So whatever comes to the deadline of ISS, anyway, we would like to maximize participate in the ISS and maximize the output.
I really agree with my fellow projects just said that we have to maximize the output of the ISS. We anticipate it to continue functioning until 2020, maybe 2030. We will discuss that. I hope we will discuss that. It is in the agenda with our NASA partners next week at Baikonur with Jim Bridenstine. So we'll see what's next, and we will be discussing that at our conference in Moscow on the 19th of November.
And I look forward to that conversation. It's important to note that the vision that we have for low Earth orbit in general is a vision for commercialization. So that if private companies and private markets can ultimately carry forward the idea that we can have human habitation in low Earth orbit for the future, that's a model where NASA is one customer of many customers, yet again, not just on launch, but on human habitation at this point, with numerous providers, again, competing on cost and innovation, which enables all of us to do more if we can, if such a commercial habitation kind of environment can be created and established. So the President's budget request was very clear that we would end direct funding for the ISS in 2025. To be clear, that doesn't mean that the ISS would be over. What that means is that it's possible that maybe a consortium of commercial companies internationally, given who's involved in this, could ultimately move forward with the ISS. It is also possible that we could have an international consortium of private companies involved in other habitats in low Earth orbit. Right now we're looking at, we have put out some contracts for studies on how people would want to utilize low Earth orbit commercially with NASA as a customer, and of course our international partners involved as well. And we're getting receipt of all those studies, and in fact we'll receive them in December, and then we'll make assessments from there. But it is also true that while I do support the commercialization of low Earth orbit, Congress doesn't always agree with me, and Congress doesn't always agree with the President. And so what gets put into law could be very different than what our objectives are. And that's the way the system works in the United States. And what we do is we advocate for what we think is in our best interest, and then Congress has other ideas about what might be in the best interest, and we eventually come to a resolution in law. I also want to say this about the International Space Station, if it's okay. This is an amazing, we talk about the technology and we talk about what we're demonstrating in the microgravity environment and all of these great scientific breakthroughs, and what we're doing in astrophysics on the ISS, what we're doing to study the Earth on the ISS, all of these capabilities and technologies that are absolutely stunning. What's more stunning about it than anything else is that we can do this in an international way. We can do it where this country will build this module, that country will build this module, another country will build this module, and these capabilities and these technologies, whether it's robotics or maybe a robotic arm, and ultimately we're able to take all of these very different countries with very different capabilities and integrate it into a capability in low Earth orbit that is astonishing. That is probably what's more amazing about it than anything else, is that we can do it collaboratively, internationally, given some of the challenges that we have around the world. And I think that's really what sets space apart. I also want to be clear, because the question came up earlier about the Space Force. The NASA position is we want to work with everybody. That's what we want to do. And it's important for us as an agency, we maintain that civilian, not just civilian, but our purpose is for peaceful uses. The International Space Station is a great example of how we can cooperate going forward to get to the moon, to retire the risk, and then go on to Mars. And if we can have partners that right now we don't partner with or aren't currently able to partner with, if we can bring them to the table and ultimately achieve even more stunning achievements with even more partners, NASA fully supports that. And so I think that's our position going forward.
So I've got one question there and then a question at the back afterwards. Okay.
Jeff House, Space News. To build on that comment, Administrator Bridenstine, it looked like in the discussion of the panel and your earlier meeting that there's a possibility for increased cooperation with China's space program. Are you looking at any specific opportunities for enhanced cooperation, and what's the process for setting those up?
So where we can cooperate is on data. And they're doing some amazing scientific experiments. They're flying to the far side of the moon. And the United States is doing some amazing scientific experiments. And we can share data and collaborate that way so that we can, each country, learn more about science. And this could be, the first confidence-building measure that is necessary to establish the kind of relationship that's necessary to go to the next step. So I think that's probably a good first step. And I think it's also important when we think about space situational awareness and space traffic management, there is no issue on the face of the planet as it relates to space more important for all of us to get right than that issue. We need to preserve the space environment for generations to come. And the only way we're going to be able to do that internationally is to collaborate on mitigation and ultimately space situational awareness and space traffic management, and then even remediation of orbital debris. So I think there are ways we can collaborate. It's also important to note that the United States of America already shares that data, and the United States of America is very involved with China on understanding, for example, the glaciers in the Himalayas. So we do collaborate already. I think there are more ways to collaborate, but we do need to build confidence so that we can do even more in the future.
For us, it's a little bit easier than for the United States of America. So we had already several experiments together in microgravity. So this was step number one. Then we are, since several years, we are preparing a joint mission, which is called SMILE. It's about solar wind, in simple words. It's more about magnetosphere, which, by the way, we were talking about near objects, asteroids. We maybe in the future we can play billiard with them. We can do something about space debris, but we cannot stop the sun of sending out flares. So therefore, in that case, we have to observe. We are discussing with NASA for a joint mission or joint activity, one and L5. For looking to the sun for solar flares. We are with the Chinese working on SMILE, which is a special project in that direction. And by the way, also we are having some interaction with China concerning astronaut flights. So some of our astronauts are learning already Chinese, and they have also some basic training together with Chinese. But it's far too far in the future to say when will be the next mission with that. So this is, again, it's also from the European side. We are trying to act there also something like a mediator, maybe in times of some special constraints. And I mentioned, because you mentioned, Jim, earlier, energy in one word, I would like to mention one thing. You all know that solar panels is something which has a big value now on Earth. It was developed in space, and together with our Japanese friends, we will fly to Mercury in a couple of weeks. And there will be a new generation of solar panels with that in Colombia, because the Mercury is rather hot. So these solar panels have a very high efficiency, but at the same time resistance to a high temperature, which is some new, maybe also something new for use on Earth.
Not only high temperature, but also radiation.
So I think there was a question at the back.
Andrew Jones, GP Times and Space News. I wanted to ask this to Janko and Jen, because he doesn't appear to be here. So I'll ask this to Mr. Bernstein, Wolf Claw's kind of ignoring that bit, and then Mr. Werner. One criticism or concern regarding the Chinese space program is that it's very hard to discern between the civil and military aspects. There's a large overlap. Is this a big concern for your agencies in terms of cooperation going forward, and would reform be something that should be welcomed?
I can tell you from a U.S. government perspective, it is a concern. From a NASA perspective, we'll do whatever the U.S. government permits us to do in order to cooperate where there are common interests, and there are areas where there are common interests. But you're right. That is one of the things that I heard about regularly when I was a member of Congress.
For us, of course, if we have exclusively a peaceful purpose, we will always avoid any interaction with military activities in partnership, but so far that was no issue at all.
I think we've just wrapped out of time. This is one last question. But if not, I think that involving everyone is the tagline for this whole Congress. And I think by discussing here, we're making that happen. So let's keep watching this space and see what happens in the future. Thank you very much for attending.